we're up to 100,000 subscribers. I originally started this channel thinking that, you know what, there'll probably be a couple of dozen people. I was at a very expensive prevention training program. It was a couple of $1,000s for a weekend. And one of the things I was thinking about is, you know what, there are a lot of people out here that would like to hear some of the core cardiovascular prevention concepts, but they're not going to pay $2,000 for a weekend for that kind of training. You know, that kind of information ought to be free, and there may be a couple of dozen people who'd be interested in it. Well, we just passed 100,000. So, and about a little bit less than half of those are in the continental U.S. We got a lot of folks that are responding to this information. It can get a little bit technical, but we do try wherever we can to either jump over the technical piece. We'll cover it somewhat because we got a lot of biology geeks here and medical geeks that are interested in the channel. But again, pardon me, I'm still a little bit distracted from what happened with the original show disconnecting. Anyhow, so what we will do is we'll go ahead and talk today let me just say one thing in case we did miss this. We're going to cover something. This was an interesting study to me. It was a new study. It was a Mendelian randomization study. We'll talk about what that means in just a minute. It's a little bit technical, and again, like other technical stuff that we cover with this channel, we'll touch on it, but we'll move on. The bottom line is, if you can wait to hear the punchline, the punchline is very, very important. It has to do with a risk factor that is critical. The biggest risk factors for health, you know, for a few decades there, it was smoking. Back in the early 2000s, smoking finally became unseated by, I think it was heart disease, as the number one cause of loss, YPLL, years of productive life lost. Unfortunately, unfortunately, some 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds are really taking up smoking again. So it's going to be back. For our generation, for the boomer generation, a couple of key risk factors. Obesity is a huge one. And if your BMI is like 25, 27, you say, well, I'm not obese. No, you're not, but that's probably driving this issue as well. One issue that we can't do anything about that's an even bigger risk factor is aging. Aging is even bigger than obesity. But again, there's a risk factor that is very important that reaches into many different and interacts with many different other risk factors that we're going to talk about today. We've actually done a series. There's a great book. If I don't mention that great book when we get into it, let somebody please remind me, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So let's go back to this study. There's new risk factors for type 2 diabetes. According to the International Diabetes Federation, 2015, approximately 9% of all adults have diabetes. And let me just remind us, as we begin to look at this study, you'll see some analytics here. One of the things to remember in terms of filtering the findings that this science creates is that clearly at least 90% of prediabetes is totally unrecognized. People have it and they don't know it. So that's where I'm saying, if your BMI is 25, 27, and you don't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you don't have a waist of 32 inches, you very well may have some issues here that your doctor has not pointed out. The science is really clear on that too. Doctors don't know how to diagnose this prediabetes issue. And as far as the big killers, the big disablers, heart attack, the big killer, and stroke, the big disabler, you don't need to have full-blown diabetes. All you need to have is that unrecognized prediabetes to have major risk for this issue. So remember that as we go through the analytics on this study. Most of the cases here there's a whole bunch of cases that didn't get recognized for this study. Now, there are certain established risk factors for developing diabetes. We know what some of those are. Obesity, for example, aging, which I just mentioned. A new Sweden-based study in the journal Diabetologia, easy for me to say, huh? Maybe not so much. Diabetologia has identified 19 risk factors for type 2 diabetes. And this is the screenshot of the study, an atlas on risk factors for type 2 diabetes, a wide-angled Mendelian randomization study. And again, let me just clarify something else for you if you're thinking, oh, well, that's diabetes. I don't have to worry about that. Oh, be afraid. Be very afraid, because 99 out of 100 people who have this risk factor, again, don't have full-blown diabetes, but they've got, quote, prediabetes, which is the same disease process. It's just that you and your doctor have not documented a fasting glucose over 125 or a challenged glucose over 200. But it's the same process. So think about that. New risk factors from this study. The methodology was, again, as we mentioned before, Mendelian randomization. Oh, and just a couple of comments about that. For those of you who don't know, I spent years at Hopkins as an epidemiologist, faculty teaching other doctors preventive medicine. One of the things we did, again, was epidemiology. What that means is it's not just studies of epidemics. It's what we call denominator medicine. I won't go into the definitions of, well, I will just say, instead of studying all the diseases in an individual, we studied one disease in all the individuals at the time. So that becomes very statistically oriented. I also did a little bit of postgraduate work at Stanford in genetics. Now, having done all of that, you would think I would be able to understand Mendelian randomization, but I have to tell you, it just made my head hurt. It is one of the more difficult concepts to wrap your head around. So having said all that, let me just try to give a little bit of generalization on that. So what it's based on is the assumption that of all the, 80,000 genes in the human genome? Somebody fact check me. I don't remember. It's a whole lot. Out of all those genes, the vast majority of them, their assumption for Mendelian randomization is that the majority of these genes are going to be randomly associated as we develop the gene pool, as people mate and develop the next generation. So one of the things that you have to think about is, well, that's saying maybe the genes for height or weight or eye color or hair color are randomly associated. And I would tend to say, that's a big assumption. Maybe they're not so randomly associated. Maybe they're not as, maybe they might have a little bit more to do with mating and continuing your genome in the gene pool. So anyhow, it gets, I'm not going to go any deeper in that. I'm going to leave those comments there. So here's the other thing that they did. They took 238 studies, including, it was from 40 individual papers. So in other words, what it was it's more than a meta-analysis, and there's a term for that. Oh, it's an umbrella study, I think is the technical term for that, where you're not looking just at one meta-analysis, but you're looking at many meta-analyses. They identified 97 risk factors, from which only 19 increased diabetes risk. And we'll go over some of those a little bit later. But again, there's just one that shone really big at the top. And yes, I'm still keeping it. It's suspense. This is my version of creating a cliffhanger. The study included information from over 74,000 people with type 2 diabetes, and almost over 750,000 control participants. The median age was 55, and gender distribution was about equal. So again, huge numbers, which you would expect from an umbrella study, a study which looks at multiple different meta-analyses. So here's the punchline. The most relevant new risk factor was insomnia, lack of restorative, healthy sleep. So to go back to some of my comments, yes, there's a book. It's called Why We Sleep. It's by a fellow named Matthew Walker. He's been faculty, he's a PhD type, one of those guys that started to go to med school, ended up redirecting into PhD work. I think he was faculty at Harvard or MIT for a while. He's now over at one of the universities in California, I think Berkeley. And that book, Why We Sleep, is a fantastic book. I've personally read it about 8 times. I personally have sleep problems. I will wake up at like 3 or 4 in the morning. And in the past, I used to have a whole lot of difficulty getting back to sleep. I've used a lot of things. Sleep hygiene is the big bugaboo for most people, but I think there's a lot more to it than just sleep hygiene. For me, 2 of the key things that I've done to improve my sleep dramatically are, number 1, resistance training. We're talking about, multiple reps, dozens and dozens and dozens of reps. I'm talking about repetitions, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, reps. I'm sick of doing reps. And you're wanting to build muscle, especially in your legs, the large muscle groups, which drive your metabolism. So we're talking about 40, 50, 100 reps, obviously using lighter weight. You can crank up to the really big weights after you've already created fatigue in those muscles from the lighter ones. And I know a lot of people say, Doc, you're wrong. You just need to do 3 to 5 major reps, using as much weight as you can. We can debate that later if you want. But the point is, that's been one of the things that's helped me more than anything else with sleep. The second thing that helped me even more was slowing my breathing rate down. I had heard about meditation. I had read it. I had tried it. And it's very interesting. You look at the literature research. I mean, the research, the science is pretty clear. Most of us don't get a whole lot out of meditation in terms of actually lowering our blood pressure, having other impact on health. We do. It's clearly something positive. But if you look at the science reviews done by the American Heart Association and the FDA, and I know everybody wants to beat up on them, and I want to beat up on both of those groups too. But here's a point. They have done a lot of research on the science behind blood pressure and breathing. And they said, you know what? Biofeedback really doesn't help. It helps a little bit, but not a whole lot. Meditation doesn't really help. It helps some, but not as much as device-driven slowed breathing. And we've talked about this several times on the channel. A device group introduced themselves to me at one time. It was called Respirate. And here's what I discovered. That device actually helps you. It measures your breathing rate and your expiratory phase. And here's the critical part. This is not so much an advertisement for Respirate as it is just a discussion about sleep, the importance of sleep, and a couple of things that can really help improve sleep. We went into the science when we talked about those in the past. And here's the thing. It's not just slowing your breathing rate down a little bit. It's going from a normal, quote, normal breathing rate of 20 per minute down to 10 or less, really slowing your breathing rate down. The other piece is that expiratory phase, having a much, much longer expiratory phase than inspiratory phase. So like, and I'm not gonna go through the whole thing, but that's what I'm talking about. And we went into the science on those. And what happens is those two things really stimulate what's called our parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is what gets us up and going. It's the fight or flight. It's epinephrine, adrenaline. Parasympathetic is the opposite. And you know what? From my early 20s until just a couple of years ago, when I woke up at 3 or 4 in the morning, I had a hard time going back to sleep. And often I would just go ahead and get up because I'd toss and turn. And you know what? I wonder how much of that drove me ending up being one of those skinny guys, older, skinny. So I kept the weight off, and my BMI is has been between 20 and 22, but still developing significant prediabetes, actually even to the point of full-blown diabetes. Sleep is a critical piece. Again, once I did a lot more of the resistance training, added some leg muscle, and especially slowing that breathing down, I've gotten to where I can reliably get back to sleep. I'll still wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning. I woke up at 4 this morning, as is very typical of me. In the past, I would not at that point have been able to go back to sleep. This morning, I was able to go back to sleep, and that extra sleep makes such a difference. So I've sort of gone down that bunny hole. I appreciate your patience with me as I did. Let's go back to the script and talk a little bit more about some of the other risk factors they found. Depression was one of them. That's one of the things I was going to talk about for a minute, how so many of these risk factors are actually related. Guess what? Is there anything more related to depression and anxiety than insomnia? Strong relation there. Systolic blood pressure being too high. That's actually, we've done videos on a thing called AGE, not number of years, but AGE, advanced glycation end products. That's how I actually first personally slipped into chronic disease. The chronic diseases are high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, plaque, and they're all very much related. For many of us, myself included, high blood pressure was the first tip off. Once you begin to start looking at it, diabetes itself does appear to be very much related to and probably a cause of high blood pressure associated with age, advanced glycation end products. Now, what does that mean? Well, there's an advanced glycation end product that we've all heard of. It's called hemoglobin A1C. Most of us know what hemoglobin is. It's what's in the red blood cells. And any protein like hemoglobin, if your blood sugar is too high, that glucose will start binding, what we call covalent binding, a permanent bond to that protein. So it's like plasticizing protein. So what does all that have to do? Well, those AGEs, those plasticized proteins, can get into the filter mechanism and the control mechanisms of the kidneys, decrease the flow through the kidney, and the kidney says, wait a minute, I'm not getting enough flow through the filters. Let's increase our pressure a little bit so we can get that flow. That is a major unrecognized cause of high blood pressure. Smoking initiation. Well, I'm not going to say any more about smoking other than that's the next one, lifetime smoking. So they looked at those both as separate risk factors. Caffeine consumption. Now you may say, whoa, doc, you've talked multiple times about maybe caffeine being healthy. Here's the thing. Yes, and you see a lot of stuff on caffeine and it goes back and forth. Sometimes it's a problem. Sometimes it's healthy. One of the things I would say is I personally think that caffeine may actually be associated back with our friend here, insomnia. Because look down here, other risk factors, non-significantly short sleep, daytime napping, caffeine consumption, all of those very, very much associated with loss of sleep. So we're planning to do, if we can get some time away from the projects, the prevention projects here in Alabama, hopefully we will be able to add some more programs on not only stress but sleep. I think we're at the end of our programmed piece. Oh no, we're not. Let me just go through a couple of other points. Other discussions about different risk factors, and guess what? If you're looking for risk factors, you can also look for protective factors. When you see this kind of image in a scientific study, usually you can assume, I think that might have been called a tree plot, maybe not, but again, what you can always assume, where you see this line, that line is the point of differentiation. This is called a whisker plot, a type of whisker plot, but basically what this shows is the dot in the middle is where they actually found the results of that particular study. But either end is where they found the potential statistical boundaries, 2 standard deviations. So let's look at a couple of these. This is what was found to be protective. These over on this left-hand side, and these were risk factors. So again, systolic blood pressure was found to be clearly a risk factor. Whether you went throughout the whole area, statistically, it's clearly a risk factor. Coffee consumption, remember we mentioned that before and talked about how cloudy that is. And you can see that here in this analysis. Yes, even though it was on this side, statistically, coffee consumption could actually have been over here, depending on what you saw. Now let's go down here and talk about the protective factors. Birth weight. So I was, as a baby, I've mentioned this many, many times. Back when I was born 64 years ago, we used to think of a fat, happy baby. A fat baby was a happy, healthy baby. And what we found out is, no, that's not the case. Actually, any babies, every ounce over, 8.5 pounds, every ounce over that, you have greatly increased risk of having diabetes, prediabetes and diabetes when you get older. It's called epigenetics. We can get into epigenetics at some point if somebody wants to discuss that. We've discussed it several times on this channel. But childhood BMI, having a lower childhood BMI was protective. Testosterone was protective. HDL was protective. So a lot of interesting stuff. You look over on this side, years of education, testosterone levels, older age at menarche. So a lot of interesting stuff came out of this Mendelian randomization study. I'm going to repeat though, no question, hands down, to me, one of the most interesting is loss of sleep as a major risk factor. So let me run through the conclusions quickly. To study, they comprehensively assessed causal associations, huge numbers, type 2 diabetes, remember, most diabetes is actually unrecognized, undiagnosed. So you get a lot of clouding on the statistics on that. Some risk factors some risk factors might be missed due to a scope review, and we won't go into that. We've already talked about why that would be the issue. There's a risk of overlooking associations. Again, some more statistical and epidemiological science junk we'll just ignore for right now. The instrumental strength was low. Again, more epidemiology, statistical issues. But the findings should inform the public health policies for primary prevention. In other words, what that means is we need to start thinking about sleep. Get that book. And I don't have any financial link to that, by the way. I've got very few financial links. I do have some links to that Respirate that I did mention if you buy it through my channel on my website. But you can buy it from the Respirate website if you want. It's not linked to me there. Prevention strategies should be constructed from multiple perspectives, such as lowering obesity. And again, don't think that you're not obese if your BMI is between 25 and 30. Look at your levels of weight. Tim Russert wasn't at 30 or more. Smoking rates, big deal. Improving mental health, and as we said, the big mystery, the big one that nobody talks about was sleep quality. This is not the first time sleep has been seen as a risk factor for diabetes. But again, it's so important. That's why we presented this one for today. As we mentioned, education level and birth weight, a couple of very interesting perspectives on protection or risk factors for diabetes. So that gets us to the end of the program. Again, I'm so sorry, so frustrated that we dropped. Here's one thing I will tell you. We're at some rental offices called the Container Yard here in Mobile. We're using them as we get up and rolling for the Mobile project. They actually have a studio, and we've talked with them about using their studio and using it to develop broadcasts and actually pushing these broadcasts more in the local lower Alabama area. At some point, we'll do that. We're probably not going to do that too much for this channel because so much of what we cover today, for example, it's more science geek. We have a lot of doctors that are interested in this, a lot of nurses, a lot of trained health people, and we have a lot of folks that are not health people, and this is who this channel is for. Maybe not a health person, but you know that your doctor's missing the key components of prevention. Thank you very much. And so let's get back to Gilbert. Why don't you give us the water ball and we'll do some Q&A. That's assuming, of course. Well, hopefully I can get that. Okay, great. So we did recover a little bit. We've got a few folks on. Tired looking for names. Started us off with a super chat button. Thank you so much, Tired looking for name, to the team, and many thanks. And I'll take this opportunity to say, Gilbert, Aspen, some of the team is in the Philippines. Ceci, Dr. Hall, Dr. Jesus, some other folks are in Mexico. So three very different areas. We tend to use a lot of the revenue from the channel to pay for our support in the Philippines, especially, and in Mexico. And $10 goes a long way in the Philippines. So thank you again so much. Tired looking for name. Dennis Williamson. And by the way, Gilbert's showing you up in the right-hand corner how to do the super chat if you'd like. Dennis Williamson has given us a thumbs up. Thank you so much. And the more you do thumbs up, the more you react to this channel, especially if you share it on your Facebook, other social media, the AI, what they call the algorithm for YouTube picks that up, and they say, oh, you know what, this is interesting. Some people have put that on their social media, and it really helps the algorithm start driving this content to folks that might be interested. Robert Weiss, good morning from the North Georgia mountains in the USA. Thank you for clarifying for so many of our international viewers that it's USA. Bart Robinson, greetings, Doc, Brewer, and James. We started off with James, and then when we had that technical thing, James said, look, he came in and told me, Ford, you're just rattling away, but you're disconnected. So he said, look, I'm maybe I helped drive the disconnect. So I'm not gonna join unless, anyhow, again. Crystal Snyder Garber, thank you so much, Crystal, for joining us. Hello, how are you? Dennis Williamson, understatement, studio is experiencing technical difficulties. Yeah, I tell you what, talking about getting all dressed up and no place to go. Really frustrating. Birja Loof, hey, I hear. Birja, that's an interesting name. Where are you? I see you're on Facebook. Where are you physically located? We'd love to know. Dennis Williams, please continue. James. Robert Weiss, yes. Bart Robinson, I can hear everyone now. Dennis Bolanos, can metformin prevent type 2 diabetes? There is a lot to metformin and prevention. There's a study, if you haven't heard it, it's called TAME. It's an acronym standing for Targeting Aging with Metformin. Near Barzilai at Albert Einstein Med School in New York is the principal investigator, but Nir was only one of many. Usually on studies, the principal investigator are the guys that actually came up with the study idea. This wasn't developed that way. Targeting aging with metformin, that study was actually done as a consensus recommendation by the gerontologists involved with the U.S. National Institute of Aging. And what they said, here was the logic behind it. What they said was, we know that prediabetes is driving most aging, killing most people, disabling more people than anything else through heart attack, stroke, plaque in the arteries. So we also know that we've got a very safe drug. So why don't we just give it to everybody? Let's do a randomized study. And that's what they did. They basically put it in the water. They didn't put it in the water, but the point was they just randomized giving metformin on a preventive basis. And sure enough, well, we'll talk about the TAME study and what it showed. But let me digress to another thing. There's a fellow named David Sinclair. He's a PhD at Harvard and MIT. He's one of the foremost prevention guys in the world. He wrote the book. Somebody help me with the name on that book. I'm having a senior moment. It has to do with 120 years, and it's aging. I did a series on his book too. It's a great book if you haven't read it. It gets somewhat technical, like our channel, and it covers a lot of the same things that we cover. The information theory of aging, the mitochondrial theory of aging, Walter Longo and his work with I can't remember the name of the dwarfs in South America, who they were dwarfs, but that gene pool does not get diabetes, and they have great health except for trauma associated with the dwarfism. It's a very, very interesting population. Walter Longo, another globally known leading gerontologist, longevist, does a lot of work in that space. All of them continue to focus on diabetes and prediabetes. And David Sinclair is one of the guys. I had a patient yesterday who said, can we go on preventive metformin? And I said, yes, we talk about that. We have a program for that within our channel. And their point is, they said, we kept listening to David Sinclair and him talking about preventive metformin, and that's what we'd like to do. and I'm totally comfortable with that. I already had pre-diabetes before I started on my own personal metformin. Had I known about this at that time, I would have probably taken preventive metformin as well. So that touches on a lot of aspects of your question, Dennis. Another informative answer is a whole lot of people think so. So screen share is an improvement. Not exactly sure what you meant by that, because we do that a lot. Rocking and rolling, just like Chuck Berry. That's right. Just like Chuck Berry, another big, a big well-known artist for this boomer culture. Robert Weiss, raise your hand if you're a biological geek. Yes, please go ahead and give us a little bit of love. Give us a thumbs up. Thank you so much, Robert, for the reminder. Tired looking for name. Thumbs up. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. What's an ideal BMI? Under point X. So BMI is a problem, and I'm just going to say a couple of things about BMI. These questions give me a great opportunity to go down a bunny hole. And I used to apologize for going down bunny holes, but when I do, people will say, well, the bunny holes are the best part. So BMI has got a problem. So what they've said is, look, BMI is really a reflection. They didn't know this until a lot of the recent science came out about body fat. They thought just any BMI, including, muscles like Schwarzenegger, would just cause stress on the heart long term. That's not really what's going on. What's going on is body fat, and that's been found out since then. And we know that, some people have a higher BMI, but it's muscle than others. And we'll typically see that. Women will think, oh, I'm too fat. Men will think, oh, I'm not fat. This is all muscle. Well, here's the thing. Yes, if you had a BMI of 30, Arnold Schwarzenegger had a BMI of 30 at the time that he won Mr. Universe. And I'm not going to go find a picture. You can imagine what that looked like. I've put those pictures on my videos when we're talking about BMI. And if you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger at the time he won Mr. Universe and your BMI is 30, it's probably still fairly healthy because very little body fat at that point. But most of us with a BMI of 30 don't look like Arnold at that time. So here's the thing. Body fat is dangerous. Be very afraid of body fat. And, most of us start with this little jelly roll, this saddle bag on the side. We used to think that was that jelly roll, that saddle bag was an innocuous, harmless energy storage tissue. It's not. It just didn't look that good. Well, a lot more than it doesn't look good. It is dangerous. It drives prediabetes. It releases chemicals that cause insulin resistance, which is the essence, the disease process underlying diabetes, which we just studied about today, and which is the most common driver of heart attack and stroke. So other things cause that too, like aging. So most people don't know that. Most doctors, whether it's family practitioners, internists, cardiologists, who say they do prevention, some of them actually do, but most of them, research has been very clear. Most of them really don't know how to diagnose prediabetes, let alone manage it. So that's what this channel is all about. Now I'll get back to your comment. So because of the problems associated with BMI, they've come up with other ones. They've come up with a couple of very sophisticated statistical analyses. And if you want to know the details on this, just Google, do a YouTube search for my name and BMI, and you'll get about 4 or 5 videos, which a couple of them 15-minute videos, which go into deep detail on BMI and the other alternatives. But let me just say this on a generalization. For baby boomers, those of us who are not major bodybuilders, BMIs between 20 and 22 are really healthy. And people say, whoa, wait a minute. I started losing weight. I started getting down to 24, 25, and people tell me I look skinny. Yeah, they're going to tell you that. Be prepared for people to say, you look sick. But the bottom line is our focus, our taste, our assumptions about what a healthy weight is are really messed up in this culture. If people aren't telling you you look sick because you're so skinny, you're probably got enough body fat there to be driving some of this problem, which is going to make it a lot more difficult as you get past 60 years old. So 20 to 22. And I know I'll get a lot of haters on that. Now, I do have a few patients, not a lot. I do have a few patients who have significantly higher BMIs, but here's the adjustment. They have a BMI it's called the Schwarzenegger. I'm sorry that I'm talking so much about Schwarzenegger, but that is the example. And there's a well-known, look it up, Google it, the Schwarzenegger adjustment for BMI. And what that is to take your belt size. So if you've got a BMI of 25 or 26, or I've got a couple of guys that are 25s, 26s, but they have a belt size of 32. Those kind of folks are probably, again, it's probably muscle, which is healthy, which is very healthy. Muscle actually helps us manage our blood sugar as we get into our 60s and above, where we start losing our insulin sensitivity. Muscle mass is critical, especially as you get over 60 years old. So we've mentioned that, we've talked about that several times. If you have the normal amount of muscle, for example, guys like me, I'm not a Schwarzenegger type, but I do have my BMI tends to run between 21 to 23, and my belt size is usually 33 or less, 32. And those are the goals. You want to keep that lower belt size. Thank you, Robert Weiss. It was a great question from the North Georgia mountains in the U.S. E.T. himself, the smoking thing. I'm not promoting smoking. Although if one does smoke 300 micrograms, 400 micrograms of a quality selenium supplement will reduce lung cancer rates to the same rate as non-smoking Americans. Well, E.T., thank you for that information. I've seen some stuff on selenium. I haven't seen this specific stuff. I have to tell you, I have some skepticism. I'm worried. I'm nervous about that. And I would agree with you, but the best thing is don't smoke, because it is such a killer. Aunt Martha Wright, good morning. I'm late. I was cutting okra. Good for you. Now, please don't put a lot of, you can fry or saute that okra, but please don't put a whole lot of breading on it when you eat it. Again, I'm from the South too, and fried okra was one of the staple products. We get a lot of okra, but it's very rare to see okra without breading. Now, here's one thing I would say. When I was in New Orleans, I interned at the Big Free Charity Hospital in New Orleans. Some of the best Cajun cooking was right down in the basement of that old hospital. And I remember you could get a bowl of filet gumbo as an intern for like $1. It was fantastic. And that filet gumbo, as you might know, filet is made from ground up okra products. So really, really good for you. We didn't know that at that time, but very low carb in that dish. Now, then you'd have jambalaya, which was full of rice. Jambalaya is great if you can just get that rice out of there, those carbs. All this is assuming that you're like most of the rest of us. As you're getting older, you can't metabolize them. carbs. ET himself, good night's sleep equals autophagy. Yes, good night's sleep equals a whole bunch of things. One of the other things it does, they've documented it. Get that book, Why We Sleep, and better yet, get it in an audio book so it can put you to sleep. It's one of the best things for me going back to sleep, listening to it. Excuse me. And he makes the point that most people don't like that. They'd be insulted, but he would be very happy for you to go to sleep while you're listening to his book. That's why I've actually heard it about 8, 9, 10 times, because I have used it for many, many months to help myself sleep. It's not just autophagy. The studies there have been clear studies that have demonstrated this. People would go into a sleep lab and they'd have a little bit of decreased sleep quality, not killer, not in full-blown insomnia, not waking up at 3 a.m. and can't go back to sleep like I've had for decades, but just a little bit of decrease on REM and deep sleep, increased prediabetes for the next 48 hours. Now you say, well, how can that happen? Decreased sleep quality causing immediate increase in insulin resistance. What's going on? Well, think about it. Sleep, especially deep sleep and REM sleep, are critical for managing our hormones, our hormonal balance. And guess what some of the more critical hormones are? Cortisol. And what does cortisol do to our blood sugar? It increases it, and it increases insulin resistance. So it's like huge, unrecognized, major risk factors that people just really ignore. So thank you again, ET, for bringing that up. TD, Dr. Brewer with a trophy. Thank you so much, TD. I appreciate it. And let me say this. I do appreciate you guys with your patience as we crashed. And I was in here yakking and didn't know it. Thank you for coming back. And we appreciate it. TD, Sergey Nubray did high volume and moderate weight too. Well, you look at Schwarzenegger, you look at Richard the Ant Hawthorne. If you haven't seen Richard the Ant Hawthorne, you got to look him up. Look him up on YouTube. They call him the Ant because he holds multiple records for the ability to lift weights that are multiples of his own body weight. Records in the deadlift, the squat, the bench press, of multiples of his own body weight. He's a tiny guy, like 135, 140 pounds, but he's lifting, what is it, 700? I mean, it's just huge amounts of weight, and you'll love the videos. Speaking of the Deep South culture, he's a Mississippi man. He's a young Black Mississippian, and it's so interesting and funny to see all of these really overweight white gym rats that are just real bench press guys. And then you got Richard the Ant Hawthorne, who's skinny as a rail, and they're all just cheering him in the cage. Got to go watch that video. I've got several pics. Anyhow, the point is, whether or not you are looking at weightlifting itself, like Hawthorne does, or bodybuilding, like Schwarzenegger does, what they have is a thing called volume method. They have another thing called touch, time under tension. And no matter, I know there are a few guys out there who say you really don't need much time at all. And I would agree with some of that. But if you're going to get into global competitive bodybuilding or weightlifting, you really got to spend a lot of time. Both of them. Tons of time. And again, that quote is from Arnold Schwarzenegger. Reps. I'm sick and tired of doing reps. I'm very familiar, very much aware, and I've had many patients tell me, no, Doc, you really need to do very minimal reps. I will still argue with that. Yes, you do 3 to 5 reps at really break out huge weights so you can, what's the word? Not congregate, so you can, not coalesce, but so you can incorporate or call in all those muscle fibers at once. But there's something for getting muscle exhaustion. That is very important. So thank you very much, TD, for mentioning that. TD, hit it hard on joint. Oh, hit is hard on joints for me. Yeah. While I'm down here working out, while I'm down here working on the mobile project, Medicare Advantage project, James, we have a corporate apartment, and James and I stay there, and he and I have he's lost a lot of weight. Our other partner, Jerry, has lost 30 pounds. And so those two are really going at it. They've inspired me to get back into some stuff, lose a few pounds. I've lost a few pounds after, again, watching those guys lose so much weight. He and I got out. We were doing some morning workouts at a local gym. They locked it up. We couldn't get in. So I said, well, let's go for a run, doing high intensity interval type runs. He thought we were talking about 40 yards, talking more like 150. And, so yeah, it doesn't really matter. Here's the thing. So the point for TD, I can do those on a Nordic track even. I can do high intensity intervals on a indoor bike. I can do high intensity one of the greatest ways of doing high intensity intervals is on road bikes. The biggest problem with road bikes is you can run into things like or they can run into you like cars. But an indoor bike, you're not going to run into anything. And you're not going to get, most people, their joints will totally tolerate cycling. If you've got knee problems such that you don't tolerate cycling, you can still do things like certain types of ellipticals. And believe it or not, you push the resistance and the intensity hard enough, you can get hit high intensity intervals on most types of indoor activities without banging up your joints too much, or indoor devices. One thing I'll also add, you bring it up, TD. Thank you for bringing up HIIT. There's a HIIT or high intensity intervals. If you look at some of our other videos, we're pretty clear on the importance of those. If you look at some studies done by Mayo Clinic, and I think this was Mayo Clinic in Rochester, they actually took 20-somethings, 50-somethings, and 80-somethings in terms of ages, 20-year-olds, 50-year-olds, and 80-year-olds. And not only did they do what's called a crossover, some of them started with resistance training, then crossed over to aerobics, then crossed over to high intensity intervals. Others did the other way around, and they did muscle biopsies. Guess where you got the biggest growth of mitochondria in the muscle? 80-year-olds, not 50 or 20-year-olds, because the 50 and 20-year-olds had not lost all that muscle mitochondria. The 80-year-olds had, and the 80-year-olds' muscle responded to it. So you got the biggest increase in mitochondria in 80-year-olds, and guess which exercise? It wasn't aerobics at all. It was high intensity intervals. So high intensity intervals are critical. Now let me define something. So one of the points that we made on HIIT training was, yeah, it's even for 80-year-olds who've really done nothing more than nothing. 80-year-olds who've done mall walking, that's been their version of work. You can go up a slight hill and, just start increasing the amount of exercise that you're getting, or the intensity of the exercise. And here's one of the ways to measure that. Some of the younger, some of the more athletic folks can start looking at heart rates. I'm 64, but I'm I've always stayed in pretty good shape. I'll get up to 130, 140 pulse rate. Most mid 60s folks can't do that, but a lot of us can. Another way to look to see if you are at the intense level of an high intensity interval is your breathing. And here's what you need to be doing. You can't talk, you can't hum, all of that stuff is what we call mild, gentle aerobics. We're talking about, you can't, all you can do is breathe. Now, you don't have to do that for 5 minutes. In fact, the intervals, cycling, professional cyclists, a lot of them spend their whole career on doing 40 seconds on, 120 seconds off, a 2-minute interval where only 40 seconds of that 2-minute interval is the high intensity piece. And they're getting levels of, global level of performance in cycling. So you don't want to do huge length. Marathoners may do a 5-minute interval, but again, that's a very different kind of thing. Your body does respond well to high intensity intervals. I've gone on enough about those. Thank you for bringing them up. Hal Slentz-Whalen, Mercola with workout on YouTube. Yes, I've seen his quote mitochondrial workout, and he must not be in great shape. I will tell you this. He was doing a whole lot of reps, but they were just, to me, I really didn't see him getting to a point where he was, and I have to tell you, given what I've seen with, even before they talked about him being a misinformation guy on COVID-19, I had already noticed that, and I'm going to leave that alone. E.T. himself takes 6 weeks to be ready to pump heavy iron, so be careful. I would agree with that. Here's the major thing. Do not try to drive yourself crazy, and don't overdo it. Be consistent. Just don't stop. And if you do something that's at the level where you can't do it, you have to stop and rest, for a week or two to get over it. Then you're doing too much. TD, I'm going to read this from TD, and I could not agree more. Dr. Mercola lost me on his COVID-related lunacy. Me too, TD. Me too. And let me tell you something. I personally have been very concerned about the number of people that very well may have died listening to, well, I'm going to be quiet. Bart Robinson, I agree too. Thank you very much, Bart. I agree too. E.T. himself, me also. He was frothing at the mouth. Thank you, guys. I tell you what, this is music to my ears, but it's unfortunate again. I've got family members who are rabid anti-vaxxers, and it's like, a lot of this has been like the Civil War, and you say, Ford, you're over dramatizing it. No, I'm not. You've had people died in the Civil War. You've got family members arguing with other family members about what to take, what not to take, and how to, what's real, what's not real. As you may know, Lower Alabama has been a capital for anti-vaxxing. Lower Alabama, in fact, Mobile was the capital for the Delta outbreak just a few weeks ago when it happened, when it started. It was the biggest city with the highest. It was the number 3 city in terms of rates alone. The number 1 and 2 cities were not cities at all. And they were having rates of like 196, 170 per 100,000 new cases of Delta virus. Mobile was like 160, I think. At this point, Delta has gone so far, so fast, it's really everywhere. I don't know where Mobile stands. But my point is, I'm in the capital of anti-vaxxers, and it's been a very interesting experience. I go back home and people say, what are you doing hanging around with these people that are anti-vaxxers? And then you come down here and they would say, what are you doing hanging around with all those crazy vaxxers? And it's like, folks, let's just calm down. and see if we can survive this thing. TD, at ET himself, it took me 7 months in 2011. I think he may be talking about getting conditioned. Well, we'll see what he says. And getting in shape with heavy weights. Yeah, I agree. It does. It takes time. Do not try to do this within a month. You do want to get conditioning, both cardiovascular conditioning and resistance training with heavy weights. And I'm not there yet. You know, I started 6 or 8 months ago, and I'm doing a lot of lifting, but not heavy lifting. Our friend James has joined us here. James, you don't want to say anything. Well, you don't have to, but you certainly say plenty when you're not around.
Hello, team. I was on the call before it got cut off, and I was afraid I was the cause of all the technology issues, but
well, you very well may have been, you know, with the mojo that you've had for the channel.
This lighting makes me look kind of like an angelic image. I have to say it's.
We were talking, one of the things we've been talking about is high intensity intervals.
Ford has introduced me to a great deal of pain.
And high intensity intervals and pain associated with those.
Dr. Brewer has started having me work with him in the mornings on these wind sprints, which I've done wind sprints before. I call wind sprints, 40 yards, 10, 12 seconds and then stop. Dr. Brewer thinks wind sprints is a 5K that you run at full speed. And then you get your lung exercise with the CPR that they, after about 250 yards and 100% humidity in Mobile, Alabama, when they're pumping your chest, you actually, you work out that COVID.
That's the work.
So it works out great. It's a great plan. I listen to everything he has to say. I think it was probably job security for the heart attack I was having. But, I got through doing that for a couple of days and gained a pound, so it worked out great.
Well, you know what they say: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Right. So if you can run high intensity intervals, wind sprints in 105-degree weather with this kind of humidity, and you don't die.
That's right. Well, you tested the theory on me.
Then you probably won't.
I said, this could stroke me out, and you said, well, that's the chance we're willing to take.
I didn't say that, but I'll remember that.
Well, good to see the audience, and I was on, and we had technical difficulties, and so I went ahead and ran our business. So thank you, and I'll let you go back to it and close it out.
Thank you. We've only got a few. Well, gosh, we got a lot more comments. I'm not going. Holy mackerel, we've got a lot of comments today. I'm not going to be able to make it through all of them, but I'll see. We'll do a few more. ET himself, thumbs up. House Lance William, the Mercola workout is 3 minutes, repeated 3 to 4 times. He copied this off another doc he attributes. D2 row, weight training and a mouthpiece has helped me sleep tremendously. Don't eat past 6 or 8 p.m. Helps. Okay, thanks. And I'm going to have patients here right after this, so I'll go. ET himself, I have zero faith in Mercola now. You said it. Well, I'll say it too. I agree with you. Bart Robinson, same here. And I'll say same here. I look up at blue sky in the AM, but Mercola said, look at the sun. Autophagy is switched on by boosting heart rate intermittently 3 to 4 times in a day. Thank you, Hal. That's I didn't know that. I had not read it. C. Lear, most of the risk factors are related to lack of sleep or cause of a person to lose sleep. Yes. So that was, thank you so much, C. Lear. That was one of the points that I wanted to make there at the end. As unrecognized as poor sleep is in terms of a risk factor, you start looking at the other things. The other risk factors are very much related to that, to sleep itself. So again, why we sleep, Matthew Walker, I've got no financial connection with that. It's a great book. Get it. It'll also help you sleep. Golden Rule, 1953. I found swimming laps, 1,000. Yes. 1,000 per meter. I think 1,000 meters. Topped off with several 25-yard meter hypoxic sprints. Really helped me relax and then sleep. That's a great point, Golden Rule. I've not been a big swimmer. I've got really tight shoulders, always have. But one of the things you find is that swimmers have a really good understanding of aerobic versus anaerobic. And they really know how to get into and out of aerobic exercise. And I would agree with you. That combination of aerobic and anaerobic is a big deal for quality of sleep. TD, how's Slint's Whalen? Thanks, I'll check that out. TD, LDL protective. Visceral fat. Yep, visceral fat's a big deal. LDL, I'm not going to comment on, as you noticed, because there's a whole lot of debate about that out there. My bottom line is that LDL is not as dangerous as cardiovascular inflammation, not as dangerous as prediabetes. Heck Lance. Hi from Cape Breton Island, Eastern Canada. Took your advice, changed lifestyle, lost 62 pounds. I feel better. Thank you so much, Heck Lance. You know, we actually have had a couple of celebrations of hitting that 100,000 subscriber mark. And, you know, it's one of the things that you get with running a YouTube channel. People like James, he's not here, but he tells me all the time, he said, Ford, you've got thin skin, you've paper thin skin. He's talking about, I can get my back up fairly quickly in a debate. And with some people I do. But one of the things I would say is if you run a YouTube channel, you get a whole lot of comments like, this doctor's an idiot, don't listen to him, quit holding shaky paper up in front of the thing, learn how to use PowerPoint. Let me tell you how to present. But, you know, so you got to have thick skin to do this. But here's the other thing that you get. You get comments like yours, Heck Lance, OAG, Old Alabama Gardener, and others. And OAG said, look, I took your test. I didn't have prediabetes. I had full-blown diabetes. I think you saved my life. And we get comment after comment. So it's comments like yours, Heck, that really make us keep doing what we're doing. Thank you so much for that content. That comment. I really appreciate it. TD's trophy for Dr. Thank you again. If you will, the best way to show appreciation is to send our stuff to your social media, and obviously the super chats. But the best free way to do it is to send it to your own social media, so they'll come back and look at our content. How's Slint's Whalen? Support sleep by boosting nitric oxide. Support 5 grams to 1 gram. 5 grams arginine, citrulline, beet powders. One of my top 10 videos has to do with citrulline and arginine. Good point. Australia, 1:40 a.m. Oops. Thank you for joining us. We have several people from that part of the world. TD, all about that AdSense, boss. I think he might be talking about the AI, Millard Woods. And for those of you who don't know Millard, what he likes to say is, look, it's Millard like Willard. Thank you so much, Millard. Glad to have you here. Glad the tech system recovered, possibly a virus. Good point. Good sense of humor too. Thank you. Joe Brunner, congratulations on 100,000 subscribers. Thank you, Joe. If this is the Joe Brunner I'm thinking of, Joe Brunner is the head of, I can't remember the name of the company, but I can certainly remember the name of the supplement, Enduracin. Enduracin is a sustained release niacin. And niacin is the only thing that we found that increases HDL, decreases LDL, decreases triglycerides, and most of all, improves Lp(a). Now we've got a whole series of videos about the studies of Lp(a), studies on niacin. Now, if you start looking at a lot of the standards of medicine, people don't, up until recently, never even recognized, never talked about Lp(a), even though it was known that Lp(a) is a problem and a risk factor. I'm blanking on his name. Somebody help me. He's the trainer on The Biggest Loser. He had a heart attack and announced, "Yeah, I'm 50. I'm in great shape. I had a heart attack. It was Lp(a). But now they're starting to say, even with that, it became prime time. People began to recognize it. Again, I'm going down a couple of bunny holes here. I'll stop that bunny hole for a second, other than to say niacin helps with that. The other thing I'll say is that you'll hear a lot of scientists and doctors say niacin doesn't help. We proved that. No, they didn't prove that. Look at at our videos on it. We go into detail on those niacin studies, like HPS2 Thrive and a couple of others, and they didn't prove that. In fact, I think it was the Aim High study. I cover one of the videos. We cover another video that was done by, as an interview done by the principal investigator for the Aim High study, and he said, "This is very unfortunate. People are going to see the results of my study and think that niacin doesn't work. We're going to have a huge number of people not do it." And in my study, it didn't show that it worked, but there are a whole bunch of mitigating issues, and people are not going to recognize them. He was exactly right. The use of niacin dropped dramatically, and that's a problem. Now, back to Joe Brunner and the Enduracin products. One of the things we've found is that there are a couple of products that actually help, and I don't think I have any financial. We do have one thing where we have a supplements store on our website, and there we do get some financial benefit when you buy supplements through that website. I think you may have access to Enduracin through that, but I don't have anything directly with Joe Brunner or in the Enduracin program. What I'll tell you is that there are two products that we recommend, neither of which we have that kind of financial arrangement with. One is Rugby, R-U-G-B-Y. The other is Enduracin. And what they are is kinder, gentler niacins. I tried niacin in the past, and it literally felt like it was burning my scalp off. And you get that. In the Enduracin product, it's actually better. We've switched to completely Enduracin based on our patient reaction, because more patients could tolerate the Enduracin. It works by this, and Joe, if you're listening, I hope I'm not giving away corporate secrets, but there's a wax matrix, and it actually helps slow the release. When you look back at the things like Aim High, they used stuff like lapropiant. Well, lapropiant did away with that niacin flush, but they also did away with the positive impact on health. So again, going down some bunny holes, but thank you so much, Joe, if that's you. Millard, how concerned should we be about electromagnetic interference affecting sleep? I had a patient who was a real electromagnetic interference fan. He's actually one of the more influential engineers in the business world. He's a major believer. He because of his interest, I went way deep, and I had always been a complete skeptic about EMR. At the end of the day, no, there's something there. Now, how important is that for sleep? I don't know. I do actually, as I mentioned, I'll use Audible to sleep with. So I know I'm getting a little bit there. I haven't had my anyhow, I'll just leave it at that. There's something there, but I think it's incredibly subtle. I'll just leave it at that. Great question though. Marvin Sal, I missed the beginning of this live. What's the new risk factor for diabetes? Poor sleep. Sleep. Very important and yet very ignored. JFK, the earth is cursed. Martha Wright, the Canada went away when I was on Metformin for a few weeks. Had that evil rash in numerous places. So excited it's gone away. Perhaps getting rid of glucose helped to kill it. Oh yeah, it very much will help to do that. Longevity book recommends Metformin. Exactly right. Thank you much. TD, thanks. Let me see how we are. Sorry, guys. We are still just too many comments. I'm not going to be able to respond to the rest of them. Thank you so much. Thank you for your interest. We're going to have to go. Bye-bye.